Wake up world, it's spring, believe it or not. So I wanted to do a land acknowledgement tonight because I think it's important to say thank you and to show respect to our First Nation people. And so the land acknowledgement is, we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the treaty and traditional territory of the Michi-Sagaik Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teaching about our earth and our relations. May we honor these teachings. I feel like in this, as we go through this session, we'll hopefully be talking a little bit about taking care of our earth and supporting the children that we care for to understand the importance of taking care of, or building a connection, so that eventually they will also understand the importance of caring for our earth so that we can pass it on to the next generation. So as Lisa said, Cathy and I are here on behalf of the Pathway to Stewardship and Kinship project. So I have been working as an outdoor activity coordinator. And so that means I've connected with, in my role, I've connected with several different childcare centers and home childcare organizations in the city of Peterborough, and been able to sort of support them, let them know what is available through the Pathways Project, and encourage them to participate as ambassadors. So I put the website for the Pathway Project up there because there are so many great resources on there. If you take a look at that website, if you have time, I know your time is precious again, but if you have time, there's really some great resources. And I know we're trying to build more and more resources. So as Cathy had talked earlier, or maybe she didn't talk when we were filming this, but about being able to continue to support the organizations, the schools and the childcare centers that have been part of our ambassador project for the first year. They'll be able to continue to be supported through the resources that are available on that website. So I encourage you to take a look at that. So this is just a little warm up. I'm going to do this quickly so that Cathy can get on with her talk about gardening. But have a look at this quote. It says, if a child is to keep alive his inborn sense of wonder, he needs the companionship of at least one adult who can share it, rediscovering with him the joy, excitement, and mystery of the world we live in. So that to me says you are all really important people in the lives of the children that you care for, because they need people around them that are going to support their excitement when they find a bug and their joy when they see the clouds in the sky or the rain coming down or jumping in a puddle. They need people around them that are going to support that. So my question to you is, what do you find joyful, exciting, or mysterious about spring? So I hope you'll just turn on your mic and tell us just one thing that you find either joyful, exciting, or mysterious, because you're the people who are going to be supporting the children in their excitement about the seasons. Anybody want to just jump in?
What I find joyful is watching the leaves come in slowly and some of the flowers blooming and the weather changing.
And the weather changing. Those are all very exciting things. Yes, for sure. Those leaves bursting out are very exciting. Anybody else?
I love spring. I feel like every day there's just something different that's happening outside and something different to discover. So I feel like, I mean, we've seen like daffodils and tulips popping up out of the soil, and we've seen like the buds on the trees and so many different kinds of birds. It just feels like every time we go outside, we discover something new.
That's great. And that's, I can tell from your voice that there you are excited about spring. That's
I
great.
really am. It's a relief when it gets here.
Anybody else?
Here it's planting seeds and watching them come up. Like we do a big garden every year. So it's the sign that we can start when the snow starts to melt.
That's so great. And have you started some seeds inside at all?
I don't know if I can't see my camera on there, but we have a whole greenhouse and stuff in our playroom and like 20 plots of plants around.
Oh, great. Excellent. And they must be excited about seeing them pop up out of the soil.
Absolutely. And they love sort of like reaping the fruits of their reward, right? So like the fruits of their labor, we get all the veg and stuff for the summer. So
Perfect. Anybody else have anything that they find joyful or mysterious about the spring?
I love that that everything turns green again. And you get all the bright colors from the flowers and the buds on the trees and everything like that from the black and white world that is winter.
That is so true, isn't it? It goes from that drab feeling, especially just as spring is approaching, when the snow is melting and everything seems to be brown. All of a sudden, it's green when the rain comes and things start to pop up. Anybody else want to share anything?
For me, it's pussy willows.
Yeah, that's a real sign of spring, isn't it? Seeing those and
Every time we would find them, it was like, oh, yay, it's coming.
that's great. Does anybody else have anything quickly that they'd like to add in? Thank you all for sharing. It's nice to have you participate, because it can be hard to do a presentation when you don't have participation. So I thank you all for taking part. So yeah, and so that indicates to me that you're all going to be those adults that support children in their love of the natural world. And so I thank you for that, and I applaud you. So I am going to stop sharing my screen now, and I am going to let Cathy take over and talk about gardening with you. So take it away.
Thank you, Nancy. And it's great to have an opportunity to be here tonight. I'd like to start by maybe just sharing a few of the things that I've found useful in gardening with children. And certainly, especially if you're a novice gardener and you haven't done much growing before, I think one of the most important things to look at before you start is how much light do you have available to you. So if you have a yard, is it where the children play, is that totally shaded, or are there areas where there's a good deal of sun? Because that will have a really big impact on what you can grow successfully. And if you're wanting to grow vegetables in particular with children, you really need to have 6 to 8 hours of sunlight every day. So there's a few things you can get away with growing with a little less light than that, but keep that in mind. And if you're starting things indoors, it really is important that you have access to either a sunny south window or some kind of fluorescent light that you can place so that it's just above the top of the plants. Otherwise, things get weak and leggy. It looks like they're growing really fast, but then they all flop over. And so plants make their food through sunlight. So that's really important. And I've also found that gardening with young children, it can be helpful to grow either in raised beds or in large containers. So it's obvious to the kids where to walk and where not to walk. We used to have at the ecology park a square foot garden where there were, clearly defined pathways and raised beds that the kids could walk around. And then you don't have to worry so much about saying, oh, don't step there, don't step there. You can easily tell them anything that's outside the raised bed or outside the planter, you can walk there, but we don't want to squash our little plants by stepping on them. You can certainly add large pots and put them in your sunny areas, and you can certainly grow things that way. I've also found, kids love to water things, and I think it's great to encourage them to recognize that the plants need a drink the same way that we need a drink. And it's really helpful if you can get access to some of those little tiny watering cans, like those plastic watering cans are just great for kids. And if you can maybe fill a tub with some water that the kids can scoop and water the plants that they're growing, that they love to do that as well. Gardening can be a wonderful way to exercise the senses. And if you're familiar with the Pathway Project, one of the landmark activities for the really young children is to exercise the senses every day. So I wanted to just talk about a few of the plants that I think are wonderful for exercising the senses. And I'd love to hear your ideas as well to add to our list of suggestions. So certainly growing plants to taste is a really important experience for kids to understand where our food comes from. And there are a few plants that are just so easy to grow with kids that mature really quickly. A couple of my favorites are, I just got some packets of seed here. Leaf lettuce can mature really quickly, and the kids can get the quick payoff of being able to pick a salad and eat it for lunch. One of the ones that kids love to watch is radishes. Now, they may not like the taste of radish quite so much. I know that kids are very picky eaters, but in a very short time, planting a few radish seeds, they grow into such a large root that kids can pull up. And there are mixes of radish seeds where there can be all different colors, which is fantastic as well. And I wonder if you folks are aware of the really easy way that you can make a plant pot for kids to sow a few seeds in, that they could either start indoors, and you can, if you have the facilities in your center, the whole pot can be planted outside in the garden, or the kids could take them home to put in a window at home. And I know we used to do this with kids. The tiny kids, of course, are going to need a lot of help from you, but they love to do this. And basically, you just take a sheet of newspaper. I don't know if you folks get a weekly free newspaper like we do, but the small pages, you just fold them in half, and then take a can and you position the newspaper so that some of it extends beyond the bottom of the can. And you just start, normally I do this on the table, but I'll try and hold this up so you can see. You start to roll the newspaper around the can, and you tuck the ends in as you go. Then I set it down on a hard surface, give it a press just to flatten out the bottom. And it helps if you've got a little bit of masking tape. You can put and you hold it and the kids can put the tape on. You probably need to work one-on-one for this, just to make sure that the paper stays together. And then you can pull out the can, and then you've got a lovely little plant pot. And usually it's helpful if you're starting seedlings indoors to, I tend to use a potting mix. Something that stays light is great. I mean, you can, if you've only got access to the outdoor soil, you can use that. There's usually weed seeds that you'll bring in from outside, and so it can be confusing for the kids to know, is what's growing, is that what I planted? So I like to use the potting mix, which you can get at any garden center or hardware store, and fill it up close to the top. The kids can sprinkle a few seeds. We also used to start onion sets with the kids in their little pots and they grow really quickly. They're those tiny little bulbs you can buy in packets at the hardware store or the garden center. And so they could start a little garden with a few radishes, a few lettuces, and maybe an onion set or a couple of onion sets. And then, the kids can understand that they need to be someplace where there's light, and we need to make sure that they don't dry out so they can water them. So I just wanted to share that idea with you as an easy way that you can produce some pots for the kids. And, it's kind of an early introduction to the composting process too, because the paper will just, once it's planted in the ground, it just composts and falls apart. So it's certainly a lot cheaper than buying those peat pots. So if you have space, other things, and sounds like some of you are growing experts, you've done lots of this before, but growing things like peas that you can plant early outdoors, and the seeds are nice and big, so the kids with their little hands, they can easily hold on to the pea seeds. And they're nice and sweet when they mature, so the kids love that, whether they're potted peas that they can shell and eat the seed inside, or snow peas where they can eat the whole thing. And so those are things that mature earlier. So I know the kids have, short attention spans, and so sometimes things that mature quickly can be good to try. Other things that kids certainly love to harvest are things like cherry tomatoes. I love to grow, the larger size cherry tomato plants. And later in the season, they're so sweet, wonderful for the kids to pick. Another thing you can think about is growing just some simple herbs, things like basil, which you can grow from seed. Oregano is it's a perennial that once you get it started, it grows forever. Parsley. So those are things that the kids can harvest the leaves, and if you're ever making lunch with little individual pizzas or something like that, the kids can put those leaves on the pizzas. So that's kind of fun as well. So just before I move on to plants to smell, I wondered, do any of you have any other suggestions of plants to eat that you've found really successful in your daycare centers in working with kids?
My son is obsessed with chives and mint. He constantly goes out, because we buried our pot last year so that it would survive through the winter. And then now that it's growing again, he'll go out and just rip them off while he's playing and chew on chives for fun. So.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Yeah, and they're pretty dependable and they come up early, so that's great. Yeah. And the other benefit with chives, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when they bloom, that also tends to attract some of the early butterflies. So the kids can see how other living things use the plants as well.
We grow our plants for the bees and the butterflies.
Wonderful. That's fantastic. Anything else that anyone would like to suggest that you've enjoyed growing with kids, things that you grow to eat?
So this isn't something that I actually planned to have happen, but we had kale growing in our garden last year, and it actually overwintered, which really surprised me. So it's kind of come back to life with all this new growth. And my children were all out there eating. They were like, "Oh, can we try this?" And I said, "Sure," thinking they would not enjoy it. And they sat there eating kale. And I just couldn't believe it.
That's
It
wonderful.
wasn't my favorite snack, but you know.
Well, it's so tender first thing in the spring as well. Those new shoots. I've noticed that with my kale as well. They're starting to send out shoots. The main plant isn't still producing, but there's all shoots coming up from the base. So that's
Yeah,
great.
I'm so surprised to see it.
Good, really good suggestion. That's wonderful. Anyone else want to add anything before we move on to plants to smell?
I know that beans are a favorite at my house because so I have two grandchildren and they don't eat vegetables on their plate, but if they can pick them out of the garden, they eat away. So I think that's great.
Wonderful. Oh, that's great. Yeah, and that's another plant that's just so hardy and dependable. For those of you who might be new to gardening, that's one of the plants that would be killed by the frost. So you wouldn't plant them out in the garden until things warm up a bit. Peas that I mentioned earlier, they're pretty tolerant of some of those cold temperatures. So that's a good thing to start with. Okay. Well, in our children's garden for years, we had a smelling garden, and well, it was planted in a spiral, and so we had a whole variety of sensory plants. And the idea there was that you would gently rub the leaves of the plant and then smell your fingers, and the kids just loved doing that. So one of the favorite plants, and this is a really hardy plant that'll come back every year, is peppermint. So if you haven't grown peppermint before, the true peppermint that has the really nice flavor and really strong smell actually can't be grown from seed. I think it's some kind of a hybrid that was developed years ago. So you have to get someone to give you a piece of a root, and they'll grow really easily. Or you can certainly pick up a peppermint plant from a garden center, or Richter's, the herb place in Goodwood. I meant to bring my seed catalogs and forgot, but peppermint is a great one. Another one is lemon balm, that's balm as in BALM. And that has a lovely lemon scent, and that's another one in the mint family that grows really easily, really prolifically. Once you've planted it, you'll probably never have to plant it again. And another one that we found to be maybe a little more delicate in terms of coming back every year is called anise hyssop. So it's ANISEHYSSOP. And it has quite a lovely licorice flavor. And although the parent plants sometimes die back in the winter, at least up where I live, which is north of Peterborough, it usually self-seeds. And so that usually comes up year after year. Catnip or cat mince is another plant that has a really strong smell. And the wild catnip grows really prolifically. There are cultivated varieties as well that have they stay lower to the ground, and they've got lovely blue flowers that butterflies love. Another one that's kind of a bit of a sensitive perennial is lavender, but that one has a beautiful fragrance. A lot of the flowers smell lovely, but the leaves too, if you rub the leaves and smell your fingers. And they're managing to cultivate hardier and hardier varieties of lavender. I used to have trouble getting my lavender to survive the winter, but now it's been coming back every year. So some of the others that we've used before, but they're They're not winter hardy. So, I mean, if you're really keen, these are things you can also get from Richter's. But lemon verbena it's like a small tree that normally grows in the Mediterranean. And for years, I brought mine in every winter. I just planted it in a pot, and then I'd bring it in the house for the winter. But kids love the fragrance of that because it smells like sweet, like lemon candies. And that was one of our most popular plants in the scent garden. And also you can get a whole variety of scented geraniums, that smell like chocolate or that smell like pineapple. Once again, that's maybe a little more expensive because you'd have to buy plants from a garden center and then bring cuttings in the fall. But, depending on your level of interest in gardening, it's something that you might like to experiment with. Other than those, are there any plants that you've noticed that the kids really like the fragrance of that you'd like me to add to our list that I'll be distributing for everyone? Scented plants?
I find the kids are fascinated by rosemary as well. And we have a huge section of our front yard, not established by us, but of peonies. And those they love for the smell, but they also love to watch the way they bloom too. So they're fun to watch with the ink and stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. And I should just mention too that rosemary is another one of those plants that normally won't survive our winter. It can take a little bit of frost, but that's another one that I plant in a big pot, and I set the pot in the ground every year, and then I bring it in for the winter. But yeah, that's another one that definitely has a really characteristic odor. Yep. Great suggestion. Any other ideas to share before we move on? Okay, well, plants to touch. I think it's really important to give kids plenty of opportunities to touch and to feel different textures. And one of the plants I brought a cutting in because it's already coming up. This one is actually woolly lamb's ears, which is it's a cultivated plant that does send up short spikes of sort of tiny pink flowers, but they're really soft, and kids love to pet the woolly lamb's ears. Now there's a very similar looking plant at this time of year that grows wild that's called mullein, that has those really furry leaves, and it can grow quite tall with yellow flowers. Mullein is a biennial plant. So the first year it just grows the leaves, and then the second year is when it shoots up those big flower spikes. So if you have that growing wild, that's a lovely one for kids to feel the texture of. And there's many plants that have textured leaves. There wasn't much of it, and it's just starting to come up in my garden, but sedum is a plant that has very smooth, fleshy leaves, and the autumn joy sedum, or some of the bigger varieties of sedum, actually bloom in the fall when there's not many other flowers around, and they also will attract butterflies. So that's another one for touching. And a number of herbs. Sage has a very textured leaf, and I'd really encourage kids feeling leaves of trees and feeling leaves of shrubs, and describing what they feel like. Our all-time star plant for touching. It may not be as easy to access this as it used to be, but we always used to grow mimosa, the sensitive plant. And that's the plant that actually the leaves fold up when you touch it. And the kids were fascinated by that. And I was checking some of my favorite seed companies that we used to buy these seeds from. Like I didn't see it in William Dam Seeds anymore, but the OSC seed company still carries mimosa or the sensitive plant seeds. So that's one that you might like to think about. And certainly there are a lot of annual plants that are really easy to grow that you can plant the seeds in the ground, and you can grow them specifically for harvesting the flowers. If if the kids want to make bouquets or if they want to decorate mud pies or whatever. And these are so easy to grow from seeds. So there's calendula or pot marigold and that'll self-seed really easily. You buy one seed packet and you probably have it, forever. And those happen to have edible petals as well. So there's no problem there if anyone wants to sample them or add them to their salads. Cosmos, different varieties of cosmos can grow really quickly from seed. Sorry, that one's Coreopsis. I don't know, does the printing come out backwards when I hold that up for you to see, or can you see it the way it, okay. But Cosmos is another one that grows really quickly from seed. And nasturtium comes up really quickly with lots of flowers, and there's kind of a peppery taste. You could put the flowers in salads, you can put the leaves in salads, and they're really easy to grow. So those are a few suggestions. And there's always I guess a bit of a trade-off between the idea of leaving the flowers for the bees. Usually a bit of a compromise, where we can pick a few, but we don't pick all the flowers is probably a good kind of stewardship principle to promote early. So if there's only one or two flowers, no, we don't pick them. But if there's lots, we can pick a few. So, and for touching too, I mean, the soil is just so therapeutic to get your hands in the soil. And it's the same thing for kids. And I'm sure you're already aware of this, but giving kids plenty of opportunities to get their hands in the soil, to make mud pies, to work with, with clay soil and that sort of thing. All fantastic opportunities for kids to develop their sense of touch. So do you folks have anything else that you'd like to add to our list of plants that that you think have an interesting texture, or that you have really loved growing for the flowers for the kids to pick or to smell, whatever? Anything else to add to our list?
We grow sunflowers is usually a common one when they'll grow. It doesn't always work for us. And just the good old-fashioned dandelion. Those are my favorites because I don't have to do anything.
Absolutely.
And we have some
Absolutely.
goldenrod too. They like to play with the goldenrod in the backyard. So
Fantastic. Yeah, and it's nice that it blooms late in the season as well. So yeah, those are great suggestions. Yeah, sunflowers sometimes, especially if you're in town, some of the biggest challenge with growing sunflowers is to try and get them to grow without the squirrels getting, interfering. I don't know. They'll just bite the flower heads off and just leave them lying there, like they not even before the seeds are ripe. So I don't know. Brings out the worst in squirrels. Right. So just a few ideas before I wrap up here of the idea. I mean, there's so much that you can see and so much beauty in the colors and the shapes and the textures that are out there, and sharing your sense of wonder at how beautiful things are. But I also love to point out to kids some of the interactions that are happening between the plants and the insects, for example. If you're growing peonies, you're mentioning how lovely their scents can be, but the ants crawling all over and helping the peony flower to open up. And the flowers, you know, the bees harvesting from the flowers, the butterflies that are attracted to the flowers. And, you know, sometimes the kids find a greater fascination with insects because they move than initially with the plants themselves. So that's always great to point out. And one of our favorites has been to build and you may already have heard of this or do this yourself, but to plant or assemble a bean teepee, which can be with, you know, with branches, it can be with dimensional lumber, the longer the better. And you can plant pole beans, or one of our favorites is scarlet runner beans, which will wrap around the poles, and they produce beautiful red flowers that bees love, but the hummingbirds love those flowers as well. The kids can harvest the beans when they're immature. They're quite tender and tasty. And the seeds, if you let them mature, kids love to open up those pods and look at the beautiful colored seeds inside. I just started, I wish I'd done this a few days earlier because this hasn't started to sprout yet, but just taking a glass jar and wrapping a piece of paper towel around it, and then wet the paper towel and just put a few bean seeds in there, and then the kids can actually watch the roots coming down and see the, you know, the sprout with the leaves starting to come up. So because when they plant them, of course they outdoors, they can't actually see the roots growing. So this is maybe a good thing to do at the same time that they might be planting some bean seeds outside, the same seeds. And they're these lovely purple seeds, which are, you know, kids love the colors of them. So just wanted to share that as well. And plants that you can plant, of course, there's many that you can plant that will attract butterflies, but things like dill are so easy to grow. You know, a packet of dill seed is really cheap, and you can collect your own seed year after year. And that will attract the black swallowtail butterfly, which lays its eggs. And sometimes people call the caterpillar the parsley worm. And I think, now I've forgotten, I think it's striped. I think it's green and black and white. But it's fascinating for the kids to actually watch the caterpillars laying their eggs, and then to see when the eggs hatch, to watch the caterpillars getting bigger. And of course, the famous plant for butterflies is milkweed, which is what the monarch butterflies lay their eggs on. And that can be fascinating to let that grow in your garden. That's another one, very hardy, deep-rooted plant. If you ever want to get rid of it, you might have trouble because the roots go down so deep. But when it's blooming, actually, that's another one that the flowers smell so beautiful, which reminds me, plants to smell, lilacs. If you're growing lilacs, I'm going to add that to our list. Beautiful fragrance, and lilacs attract butterflies as well. So a few of the other favorite plants for attracting butterflies, anything in the mint family, black-eyed Susan, daisies, milkweed, purple coneflower. Those are all great and hardy plants that are beautiful, produce flowers in abundance, and you'll see lots of butterflies also in the yard if you're growing them with kids. So I should probably wrap up so that there's time for Nancy to carry on. But do any of you have any questions? Because I'm going to step out once Nancy starts her next section of your workshop. But any garden-related questions that you'd like to ask while I'm still here?
When would we be able to plant things like radishes or peas? Is it too early to do that yet, or like wait a few weeks? what's the timeline for that?
Things like radishes and peas, you could plant now. After this snowfall, I'd maybe wait until the soil dries out a little bit, just so you're not compressing it. Normally, you try to avoid working in the soil when it's quite wet. Um, you might be wise, maybe wait another week, but those plants and the lettuces as well will take some cold weather. So and spinach, that's another thing that you can plant now. Anything like, tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, you wouldn't want to plant them or plant your transplants out until after there's no danger of frost, because they would be killed by the frost. But yeah, I actually planted peas last week. So we'll see. If they don't come up, if it's too cold and the seeds rot, well, I'll plant them again. But we did have that stretch of early warm weather, so I think the soil has warmed up a bit. So it's worth a try.
Okay, thank you.
Any other garden questions? Oh,
I have another one
noticed-
to add to touch if you wanted another one for your list.
Yep, absolutely.
Hens and chicks are usually quite fun.
Oh,
I tried to grow them
idea.
in my garden, but they were too shaded, so I put them in a pot, and the kids like to poke at it as they come up the deck and stuff. So
Great idea. Okay, thank you. I'll add that to the list. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you. And if you think of any questions afterwards, you can certainly send them to Nancy Doherty. You probably got her contact information, or directly to Lisa. And I'm happy to respond to you. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Cathy.
And I'll toss the baton to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kathy.
Okay, so I'm going to continue. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and continue on with the slideshow. There we are. Okay. So, thinking about the change of seasons, I think every change of season is kind of dramatic, and so we change the way we spend our time with children, because now the weather's warming up. We've got longer days, so we've got sunlight a little bit later in the afternoon, so we could be outside until children get picked up. So there are lots of things that change as the seasons change. There's new sensory exploration. So Cathy really dealt with most of the sensory piece of it, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But as she said, that's one of the landmarks that Pathways has put in place for those 0 to 3 age group. And so sensory explorations is a big one, especially for young children, because they like to taste and touch and smell and do all of those things with anything, most things that they come in contact with. Another one of the landmarks is exploring together outside. So because of the change of seasons, there's more time to spend outside. And then the third landmark for the 0 to 3 group is having positive experiences with animals. So because with the season changing, we're seeing more insects, more birds. We see things emerge that have been sleeping for the winter, like the chipmunks. So we have more opportunities for connection with animals. You're going to find that I'm probably going to go a little bit quickly through some of this, because I have a little bit more than I probably should have in this presentation. So this was just an introduction to Cathy's sensory explorations in the garden. Thinking about all children's senses as they explore. And so outside of the garden, there are the birds listening to their sounds. One thing that I was introduced to recently was the sound of birds. Rather than trying to, children often have a hard time seeing birds when they're moving quickly or they're in the amongst the bushes. But if you can help them identify the sound they make, and there's some like Tanya mentioned, she noticed a chickadee using the fur from her dog to make his nest, which is pretty exciting. But the chickadee makes a really distinctive little chickadee sound, which is kind of a good one that kids can usually pick up quickly. So if you can pick a couple of birds and identify their sounds, that can make interesting, and children will go outside and they'll listen for the sound of the bird. I'm not saying have them identify every bird that comes along, because that'd be too much, but pick a couple that you know, and just point it out as you go along through the day. Bugs, I'm sure you enjoy discovering bugs, especially some children are really interested in looking for bugs everywhere. Some children really like to touch the bugs, and so there's as Cathy talked about with plants, I feel like there's a balance here. Little children do love to grab things. Thinking about worms, and I always remember as a kid pulling worms out of a hole and breaking them in half, and at that point, it didn't really bother me, but as an adult, I think about that and think, that was really not very kind. So there's a balance, right? Children will explore that way. We know that. But maybe introducing that idea of being gentle and handling things with care, so that as they grow and they're able to have more control over their fine motor, they'll be able to be more gentle with those little things. Raindrops, I was thinking about taste. What can they taste? And other than the plants that Cathy talked about, so catching raindrops on their tongue. Can they catch a raindrop? What does it taste like? Is it cold? Is it warm? Does it taste the same as the water you drink out of your cup? Dirt and mud, of course, there's lots of that around. I'm sure you're finding that throughout your house and everywhere you go these days. But touching, squishing, Cathy mentioned that therapeutic, getting into the dirt and really feeling it. I also know that there are some children who are more sensitive to touch and will be hesitant to put their hands into anything that they might not know how it's going to feel, or might be afraid of it. Having some little gloves that they can wear when they're doing some gardening can be a great thing too, because for those children who don't like to get their hands dirty, it can be helpful. Does anyone have children that are a little bit more hesitant when it comes to touching things? Nope. Okay. And that's great, actually, because those are the kids that are not afraid to try new experiences. And sometimes with others, you have to sort of encourage them a little bit and find some workarounds for some of that. And so flowers and leaves. So Cathy mentioned this. Can you smell them? Rub a leaf between your fingers, see what happens. Does it stay on your fingers? What happens? How does that happen? And talk about like the oils and how it's transferred. Anyway, exploring with all your senses. I know that, and one thing about the spring to me, it offers many, many opportunities just by being spring, by things blossoming, by the grass growing, by the bugs and the things that we're seeing. It offers so many opportunities for us to explore with all our senses. We don't have to add a lot of things to nature at this point, right? We don't have to plan many different activities in order for children to experience those sensory moments. Also, I want to say, hop in and let me know if you have any questions, you want to make any comments. I'm really happy for you to do that as we go along. Don't feel like you have to wait on that. I'm going to try showing this video. I just really liked it because I thought after Cathy's conversation about exploring with senses, this focuses on infants. So I'm going to play it and let me know if you can see it, because I'm not sure if you can see it this way or not, or whether I have to show you a different way. Can you see this? No? Okay.
So with this activity, we have a big basket of different
Okay, I'm going to stop it. Stop. I'm going to go here. Just give me 1 second. Okay, try again. Can you see this time?
About their texture, about their color, about their feel, if they're hot, if they're cold. We'll talk about if they're smooth, if they're bumpy like the broccoli. After that, we give every child an opportunity to feel them all. We'll talk to them about, again, the color. They'll, of course, at that age, they do a lot of mouthing. So you'll see a lot of that, and all of the vegetables will pre-wash for that. So they have an opportunity to really explore the feel and the smell of all of it. From there, we usually branch off into different aspects of what's going on. So in this particular one, we were able to take the celery that I had made little brushes out to use as a simple tool for painting for them. They always have the option to use whatever I give them. They're never limited to if it's a paintbrush, or in this case, it's stalks of celery. So with that, it's up with her, just to kind of explore the feel of the paint. And it kind of enables her to broaden her aspect of her sensories with touching and whatnot. There's different aspects that we'll do with the children throughout the day, all pertaining to vegetables, and then it all comes back full circle with them coming throughout the day to that same vegetable that we had, and they'll be able to talk about it throughout the week. We'll just kind of focus on those different things in the classroom.
Okay. There. Okay. So what did you think of that?
I looked up the word creative.
Oh, sorry, guys.
And the word creative was from Old English. And it's like a sorcerer. It's like a magician.
Give me a minute. I have to tell it to stop.
So if you want your child.
What are you writing?
So Nancy,
Yeah.
I'll just say now that it's a little bit different in home childcare, that when introducing those new fruits and vegetables and any food item, that is a conversation that you need to have with the parent first, and make sure that it's checked off on the list of allergy purposes.
Good point, Lisa. Yeah. I was also wondering when I watched that, I showed it because I thought it was interesting to see those infants, right? Touching, mouthing. It might not be something that you would think about doing, as giving a child a whole head of broccoli to sort of manipulate. And you may not choose to do that. You may give them a piece of broccoli if they've already had, been introduced to it. But I was also wondering about in our COVID world about that particular activity. I wasn't sure if that was something that would be, because of the close contact, the possibility of sharing those foods. I wondered about that. Do you want to comment on that, Lisa?
We've had these conversations with providers, and when offering sensory experiences, just having individual and certainly with infants, if they're in the high chairs, then they're away from others when they're eating, and that's one of the COVID restrictions that you don't have to follow. That's one of the times that you can take a mask off is during feeding and eating and drinking.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So the second landmark was spending, and the landmark is actually explore outdoors together at least 1 hour a week. Well, we know that in your childcares, you are out every day for more than 1 hour. So you meet and go over that landmark. But thinking about this time of year and the amount of time that you probably spend compared to on a beautiful day, maybe not on a freezing cold, windy day like today, but on a day where spring is really here and you're feeling that warmth of the sunshine, you're probably spending more time than you have been in the winter outdoors. And so thinking about how you can optimize that time, how you can expand the time outdoors. What are some things you couldn't do outdoors? Are there any, can you think of something like when you think about some programs in other countries where they spend the entire day outdoors, what are some of the things that you wouldn't take outdoors here?
I think bathroom routine would be difficult.
Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yes. What about sleeping? Would you sleep outdoors?
It can be done.
It can be done. And so I guess it depends. Like if you have some infants who like to sleep outdoors and you have a safe spot to put them, then great. I know I was speaking to a group of people who worked in a childcare center, and they said that wouldn't work for them. Sleeping outdoors wouldn't work for them. Probably you have the benefit of being in your own homes where you could possibly set up a space that could be used regularly. And you have a small group of children too, whereas a childcare center has a big room full of children that makes it more challenging to have people sleep outdoors. But that's good to know that you might even think about having nap time outside sometime. And so thinking about ways
to be aware of doing, you just have to be aware of doing your sleep checks every half an hour and documenting them. Right.
Well, maybe you would sit under a tree while they're sleeping outdoors. Yeah, but no, I'm glad you're chiming in, Lisa, because you know all of the regulations and I'm not as familiar with them. And so thinking about how you can adapt your outdoor environment to extend your time outside. So maybe having a picnic table and planning your meals ahead of time so you can bring them out so that you could eat outdoors together. Thinking about ways that you can, set up a space for some art activities outdoors. So that you don't have to, and I think a big part of that is being organized and planning so that you don't have to run back and forth. You've got everything at your fingertips, so you can be present with the children while you're transitioning from one activity to another. And so thinking about being outdoors for an extended period of time, what other considerations do you think are important? So thinking about going into the sunnier weather, the
Reapplying
Like protection
sunscreen.
and stuff, like hats and sunblock and whatnot.
yeah, maybe some shaded spaces, you know,
Yeah.
sun shelter and
water.
some, sorry.
Lots of water to drink.
Lots of water to drink. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, thinking about how you could do that, make it a safe environment for everyone outdoors, by taking those things into consideration. Bugs are another one. I don't know if any of you live in the country where the bugs come out of the woods and often that's another consideration that people need to take into consideration. So thinking about how you're dressing, how the children are dressing. The recommendation is, you know, to keep them in long sleeved and long pants. If they're playing out in the grass or the long grass or doing any of that kind of play. Just thinking about ticks as an issue at this point in time too. I think being prepared is a big piece of the outdoors. And then what are you looking forward to doing outside with your children that maybe you haven't been able to do? Anybody have any thoughts about?
We like doing our picnics outside in the summers and warmer spring days.
Yeah, I think that's exciting for the children too, right? To be outside, to be somewhere else and eating. Spills aren't such a big deal.
Letting them run through the sprinkler.
Oh yeah, that will be nice, won't it, when we get to that point? So thinking about those things you haven't been able to do that children now can just do. Even going outdoors without putting on extra coats and boots, just putting on, you know, shoes and a sun hat. Won't that be nice to have that sort of freedom of as things change? And then thinking about all of the activities that children learn just by being in nature. So children can do art with, they can build a design with sticks and stones. They can be creative by drawing in the sand. There's lots of science and math involved in nature when you're looking, you know, you can count the stones, you can count the bugs that you find, you can look at the ladybug and see how many dots it has on its back. The thing that's nice about being outside is, as I said before, it's often right there in front of us. We just have to notice it and encourage children to see what's there as well. So I've given you this little resource that's on here. I'll make sure Lisa gets a copy of the slides that has some really great ideas about doing nature activities. A lot of them are art, but they're very simple, and it's the Canadian Wildlife Federation. So they're all really, really simple activities to do as well. So I've given you that just so, because I know that, and I was going to go through a little bit of it with you, but I think I'm just going to keep on trucking. So this is a little activity that I think that some of you may have already done something like this. Some people might call it a fairy garden. I called it a woodland garden because it had some animals and turtle and things like that in it. But something like this is really simple to do, so that with the children, and it can be based on things that they may have collected. So they may have gone on a walk. You might just check out their pockets and see what they've been collecting in there, and decide what you're going to put in your woodland garden. And this is just a pot filled with soil that's covered with moss. And then I put a pansy in it, and there's some creatures in there. There's a little dish of water. I don't know if you can see that or not. But it's a pretty simple, and gives kids the opportunities to use their imaginations, to problem solve, figure out how they're going to put things in there. And then when if they want to make up a little story about what's happening in there, how did all these people come to live in this garden? Are they friends? Are they enemies? How can they learn to get along together? There's all kinds of stories. And some people call this small world play, and it gives kids a real opportunity to be in charge of something, that create a garden of their own and be in charge of it. This has a pansy in it, so it does have something that requires some care, but you wouldn't have to put something living in. If you wanted to just stick some sticks or some leaves in there, you could do that too. Has anyone tried anything like this, a little garden of some kind?
We had a fairy garden back when I was in a daycare center. It was cute.
Did you? And how did you plant that? How did you do that, Tony?
I can't take credit for it. I don't have a green thumb at all. So it was my co-teacher, but the kids loved it, and they would bring in things throughout the week. They'd bring things from home to add to the garden. So it started small, but it sure grew pretty quick. And the kids really incorporated home life to the classroom. So, because parents are like, oh, they had to bring this for the fairy garden. And so it was a good connection with families too.
That's great. And I also, that's a good point, that this is one pot, but you could do it in a bigger container. You could do it in the ground. It's like if you had a little corner that was a little quiet corner in your yard, you could do this there under a tree. You could do, everybody could do their own little pot, and then you could bring them together to create some kind of small town. I think there's lots of creativity that could go along with this. And I don't think you need a green thumb. I think you could pull this off without having a green thumb. So I encourage you to try something like this, because it's simple and it's something. And I liked your point around involving the parents. They involved their parents, I guess. They went home and they asked if they could bring things. So bringing home into childcare and vice versa is a really nice way to connect and engage families too. Okay, you're likely not going to be able to see this. I'm not going to fool around with it. I'll just try it and see if you can see it. Can you see it? Oh, you can.
We're going to talk about playing with toys. Have you ever noticed that your children like to carry things around?
I can't hear it.
Can't hear it. Well, it's really just me repeating the words that are on the screen. So if you could, can you read it?
You can make a simple toy by
Yeah.
a rope, string, piece of yarn over a railing, doorknob, branch, or fence. Attach a bucket to it and then give it a pull. Children will need guidance to help them with their toys, because their discoveries may surprise you. This is an example of a pulley that you can find at a hardware store. We used a rope to fasten the pulley to the fence, then tossed it over a branch. The blue rope threads through the wheel on the pulley. We experimented and learned a lot about physics, things like force, gravity, balance, and lots more.
Yeah, Grandma, you can let this one go and drop as hard as you want to, because it's metal and it won't break anything.
We hope you enjoy some time with your children playing with toys. Remember, kids create an experiment. It is so much fun.
Okay, so that was my grandchildren playing in the backyard with pulleys. This past year, I've been working from home, and that's what we've been doing. I work at the Peterborough Child and Family Center, And we have been posting things like that on our Facebook page. So that was one of my my attempts at Facebook. And anyway, it was a lot of fun, and we left that pulley up for a long time. And I know that those kids are a bit older than the children you might have in care. But that particular activity, I have done it with younger children at another program that I did when we were in person with my work. And the toddlers loved it. We set it all up and tied a basket to the end of the rope. And then the toddlers would put things in the basket. Sometimes they brought their own creatures to put in there. Sometimes they'd put in shells or sticks or whatever. And then the older children would pull it up and it would crash down. And that cause and effect is something that toddlers will do for hours, right? And they would laugh and they would watch it and they would hear it crash. So that kind of an activity is, some people might shy away from it because it involves ropes. Is it something that you would try at your house? Has anyone done anything like that?
Absolutely. I'm already writing down the list.
Excellent, excellent. And so that, I think you have to, and I think with all of these things, because I'm going to talk a little bit about introducing tools and thinking about how children might benefit from having those kinds of opportunities. I think what you have to do is sort of assess your risk. Think about how you feel about the activity. If you've seen it done before with similar age group children, if you have been able to see the benefits. For example, it's too bad you couldn't hear the sound in that, because when they first of all, they break the bucket, right? They broke the first bucket, it was plastic, and the second one was metal and it didn't break. And so that they came to that understanding, oh, we have to use the metal bucket because the first one just breaks, it's no good. So there's so much learning and problem solving. They had to work together, and those two don't work together very well. So there's so many benefits to that I wasn't going to say no to it. However, you have to assess your own risks, and you also have to, it is a kind of activity that you need to be there in order to, for example, that bucket can come crashing down, so people have to stay out of the way of that. You have to make sure the rope's safe, that it's not going to be tangled around anybody. So you have to sort of think about how that's going to go with the group of children that you have, and probably the time of day. All of those things you're going to have to assess. But think about, do the risks outweigh the benefits? And that's, I think, what you have to think about. So again, with all of these on this slide, I've got a list of different tools that you can introduce with children. And I'm not saying bring out the hammers and screwdrivers and pliers, everything at once, and just, say go at it. Be thoughtful about how you introduce it. Is a child even interested in something like this? If a child shows no interest, then that's not something you're going to continue to offer at that point in time. You might try it again later. The shovel is probably the easiest thing, and probably you all have shovels in your childcare as right now, as in one form or another, right? They might be the small plastic shovels. They might be a larger shovel that they have to stand up and use. But thinking about how they're going to use them, why they might be fun to use, and how you'll introduce those materials to your kids. Any thoughts on using tools with kids? Have people done it? Are people thinking, no, that's not going to work? I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
We do shovels a lot when we're planting. I'll do like an extra sort of planter of dirt so that they can mess around with it as much as they want. And then if they want to actually use it to plant sort of properly, they can come and help plant the actual plants. But if they just want to dig and get dirty, they get their own little like thing to get messy with.
That's perfect. Yeah. Because sometimes they just want to dig.
Yeah.
That's great. How about any of the other tools? Has anyone tried hammers with their kids?
I did with a group of preschoolers. It was a year that I had a lot of older preschoolers, and we started with the golf tees in the what's that?
Styrofoam? No.
No, the thing you put in the bottom of plants to put flowers in. Oh, anyway, it's the green foamy thing.
Oh yeah.
Oasis.
I told you I don't have a green thumb. Yeah, whatever that foamy stuff is, even that's sensory. I had fun playing with that. But so they practiced hammering golf tees, and then we did upgrade to real nails, and the kids loved it, girls too.
Yeah, that's great. And what a good skill for them to learn. And there's all of that. Like I have a hard time hammering because I'm always missing the nail, right? So if they're learning that hand-eye coordination at that early age, they're not going to be me at my age, not being able to hammer a nail without hitting my thumb. So that's great. Now, sometimes you can buy child-size hammers, or you used to be able to buy them at Home Depot. I don't know what you can get at Home Depot anymore. But Lisa says, yes, you can, or yes.
It was just interesting watching how they knew to be careful. We didn't really have to, kind of like hover too much. They knew that it was, it would hurt if they missed. So they were naturally gentle, which relieved a lot of parents. But yeah, it was great watching them.
And I think that's a really good point that you make, that children do understand. A lot of the time we don't give them enough credit for what they do know. So and what's the risk if they hit their thumb with a hammer? Like, what is the risk? It's going to hurt. They might get a bruise, and I know that's really hard. When you're doing childcare, you don't want to send a child home with a bruise. But in the scheme, if you think about the benefits of them being able to actually learn that skill, and maybe you're going to, if they're a group of children that you're worried about, maybe you're going to introduce a wooden hammer or a plastic hammer to start with, and then upgrade them as they get a little bit more confident and able with the tools. But I would encourage you to think about introducing some of these things and see what happens. Even just, bring out a screwdriver and see what they do with it.
It's interesting how much they learn too from giving them the opportunity. One time, it just made me have a flashback. We were building blocks and it was getting too high. We couldn't reach. And we said to the kids, well, how can we solve this problem? And one of them hollered out, get a ladder. So we went to the cupboard, to the utility, and we got a ladder. And I'm like, get the camera, because nobody's going to believe this. So they thought it was great. Of course, they had to have a teacher with them holding the ladder, but they went up that ladder and they kept building the tower.
Great. That's great. You've got some good experience to share. That is great. And I think
my supervisor was away that day, so we were.
It's always useful when you have a positive experience, right? Because then you can take that picture and you can show it and say, look, this is what happened, and people the children were successful in their quest, and they felt good about themselves and they felt capable and confident. So that's great. So I would challenge you. The flashlight is a great one, even in the daytime, to give them and have them look under some rocks or behind a bush or something with a flashlight. learning how to sort of just turn it off and on. Little ones love to push buttons, so figuring out how to do that. And so, in the watering can, as Cathy talked about, you could start with some small ones and then, work your way up into the big watering cans, because that takes a lot of muscle power. And again, that big body coordination to pour that way. So I'm going to continue quickly because I see that it's almost 8 o'clock. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we talked a little bit about risk and but thinking about when you're outdoors, children are going to try climbing on things. They're going to be curious about balancing. They may want to jump in a puddle, which you might consider a risk. They may fall down and scrape their knee. So I think it's important that you all think about what you're comfortable with as far as risk. Is it useful? Is it safe? You don't want to do anything that's unsafe. But if it's worth the risk because it's going to be it's going to be a learning experience, then consider it. Talk to Lisa about it. See what she says. I'm sure that collaborating with someone else to reflect and think about what the activity is actually how it's going to benefit children could be helpful for you.
Well, we are all for risky play.
Perfect. That's good. So another way to sort of encourage children to stay outside longer, to spend time exploring, is to have some spaces that are their own, some spaces where they can connect to the land, where they can connect with each other, where they can just sit and have some calm down time. So here's the bean teepee that Cathy was talking about. This is what, when she described it, if you planted the beans around the outside, they would grow up the poles. And this one's made out of sticks. I have one out in my garden that's made out of just bamboo that I bought at the dollar store. So it depends on, if this one looks like a much sturdier one, that if once it got built, you would be able to fit 2 or 3 children inside of that if you wanted to. I liked this one. When I saw this, I thought, oh, this would be fairly simple to make. And it's just a hula hoop with ribbons tied on it and over the branch of a tree. So again, it's a space that they could go in to be by themselves, but you could also have some social time there with other children. But it could be a secret place as well. Think about how you could build those spaces. They don't have to be permanent spaces. They can be temporary, like a tent, or use some tarps to even put over some chairs to build a little tent with, that the children could create a space for themselves. If you have a big enough space that you can build a fort with sticks, you could just even make a little corner of your yard that was a quiet space, where the children could go and sit maybe on a rock, or they could help you decide what they wanted to put in that corner. Think about bringing out a big cardboard box. I know they don't last forever, but you could probably get another one when that was done. And then for younger ones, for infants who like to also, they would also climb inside a cardboard box or a tunnel, so that you could create those places where they can have some quiet time on their own too. Lisa?
So having cardboard anything right now is kind of hard because of COVID cleaning.
COVID.
Being restricted.
Okay.
Unless you had one for each child.
Which would be great if you could have one for each child, but so that's maybe not currently a good idea. but yeah, and so I think about how you can creatively make some spaces where children can have a little quiet space, a little hidey hole of their own. Has anybody got a space like this outdoors?
Last summer, we did a giant pea teepee in our yard for peas and beans. So it kind of created, we did it big enough so they could use it as a playhouse. It didn't get as covered as we wanted, but the kids still loved to go in it because we left like a little doorway. So they could go and like mow the lawn in there because the grass kept growing because there was not enough shade.
That's perfect. Caitlin, you should send me a picture of that teepee. I'd love it. If you have one without children in it, I'd love to see, love that for my.
I'm pretty sure I do. And it was quite tall because we had gone to like Jackson's Creek on the weekends to collect branches, and we kept the branches for this year. We're going to try it again on in a different way to see if it works. But yeah, it was quite tall. Our neighbor was watching us like, what are you doing?
That's great. That's great. I'm glad that you've already done that. And I think I like also incorporating a trip to Jackson Park, right? You went out and you gathered the things you needed together. And yeah, I think that's so wonderful that you were able to do that. Anybody else have any thoughts on spaces that you've been able to create outside? And it's something that you might think about just to add some interest to the environment outdoors. That children might surprise you in that they might want to take things into the tent. They might want to make it a house. They might want to create something else. They might want to just keep it clear in there and decide what they're going to do with it. But yeah, think about what you could do. It could be as simple as a little pop-up tent that you have, or a piece of fabric or a tarp over top of a couple of chairs, and setting something like that up and inviting the children to explore it can be sometimes be the beginning of an activity or an experience for the children that might go on for a little bit longer. It might grow. They might decide they want to do something different with it. Okay, so meet animal friends. So animal friends, that's the third. And I'm going to go quickly through this because I see that it's after 8 o'clock, and I know you guys are getting tired. So I found this fun worm facts, and I loved it when I found it, because it tells just a little bit of information that's pretty basic, and it talks about how great worms are for the garden. But it also talks about how worms are sensitive to temperature and touch. So if we're going to handle a worm, we're just going to handle it gently, and we're going to then put it back in the garden when we're finished. Or we're going to make a little house for it ourselves by adding some dirt and some leaves to a container, and we can keep it in there and watch it for a few days. The worm, you might not think about a worm as an animal friend, but it really is when you consider how great it is for the garden, how we could put some worms in a container, and it would compost our vegetable scraps, and they're plentiful. They're everywhere. So if you haven't explored worms, I challenge you to take this little fun fact and share some of it with your kids. So this time of year, you're going to be seeing soon some baby birds. I'm sure some of you have already maybe seen some eggs that have been either fallen out of nests or been taken out by other birds on the ground. You'll soon be seeing bits of shell around. So I don't know if any of you have a bird that's nesting anywhere near. This was taken by one of my coworkers outside her patio window, but we were at my work. We still have a robin that nests right outside our playroom door. And they seem to want to come back to the same spot every year. So if you have a chance to sort of observe that from a distance and see the process, you might not see the bird babies when they're this size, but you probably will see them as they get to the point where they're flying off or coming out of the nest a little bit more. So I encourage you to.
Nancy, can I?
Yep. You're frozen.
Sorry, I'm saying doing a Zoom presentation tomorrow for us at 9:30 about nest making, if you'd like to join us.
Oh, great. That's great. Who's doing it?
So the Camp Cortha.
Oh, cool.
Oh, I think it's Jacob. Yeah.
Oh.
So the link was in the newsletter that came out last month, if anybody wants to come.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So this is
On our calendar.
Sorry. This is a resource about building birdhouses that I thought was a really good one, and it gives some really good tips about if you like to build things, or you know someone who likes to build things. It gives some really good tips about what to use to build a birdhouse and things not to do. One of them said, don't put a perch on your birdhouse, which I like. You see birdhouses with a little perch on them, because predators can get into the bird, can sit there and steal the eggs out or whatever. So I thought, well, in itself, that was a good tip. So anyway, that's a little link if you're interested in building some birdhouses. So think about finding hidden. Finding things hidden in nature. So children love to treasure hunt. They love to search for things. So where will they search for things in your yard, on a walk? Sometimes a crack in the sidewalk can yield a treasure. So think about where they can search for hidden things. Think about some scavenger hunts. There's lots of those on the internet, or you can make up your own scavenger hunt. We're gonna go for a walk today. Let's see who can find a feather, or who can find 3 rocks, or who can find a piece of bark. So you could make up your own. You don't even have to have it written down. You can just have it in your head and talk about it as you walk. It's very simple. Think about magnifying glasses. The magnifying glasses are, they're easier than binoculars. Binoculars kids have a lot of trouble with, but a magnifying glass is one single piece that they hold in their hand that they can control. They can move it around. It takes a while for them to figure it out, but it's a nice simple piece of equipment that can go in a pocket to take with you when you go for a walk. So think about something like that. This is an idea I got from one of my other outdoor pathways consultants. So Nature Nancy, some of you may have already had her come and do some work with you or introduce some ideas. But she talks about making nature cameras. So it's not a camera. This is what it is. It's this frame that you take with you, and when you see something that you really think is interesting, you capture it with your frame. Now, you can also take a picture of what's in there if you have your camera with you, but it doesn't have to be a camera. It can just be something a child is interested in, and they remember the picture that they took. So thinking about it's very simple. You could make that with children. They could decorate that and take it out with you again as you went on a walk. And it's kind of exciting for them to actually see what they choose as what's interesting to them. This is actually a little scavenger hunt that you could use that I thought had some unique things on it. I liked this one, plant a seed that you find on the trail. So an acorn or a pine cone or some willow fluff. Lisa, you might like that one. That some pussy willow fluff. And see what grows, see if it will grow. I know that it can be pretty exciting if children find something and they plant it and it actually grows. And oftentimes things grow up in our gardens or in pots and we don't know what was dropped in there. So there's a surprise, but yeah, finding something that's on the trail that can be fun. So think about taking a look at some of these and seeing if you can incorporate them into your outdoor activities. So
Nancy, will you be sending me this presentation so they can look at it afterwards?
Yeah, I will. Yes. So we have rainy day.
Yeah, no,
Pardon? No? Okay.
I just asked if you were going to send me like the notes so people can review them, not just the recording.
Yes, I will. So what do you do on a rainy day? Make sure you dress for the weather, get an umbrella, jump in puddles, rescue worms. Worms can drown in the water. So if you see some worms in there, rescue them. And that's a really good way, again, to show that you care for these little creatures that need your help. Make some paper boats to float. I know that making the boats, younger children might have some struggles with doing some of the folding, but if you have any older children, they love to do this activity. And if you wanted to make the boats on your own and take them with you to go out and try and float them, that would be fine too. Float leaves, sticks, grass. Sometimes you find water running down the street or running down your driveway or coming out of your drain spout. See if you can float things down that and make them move. Make mud pies, mud prints, mud paint, mud soup, mud. There will be lots of it. Do some chalk drawing in the rain. All of those are fun. I'm sure you guys have lots of other great ideas of things that you can do outside on a rainy day, but I wanted to make sure that I included this because we will have rainy days and it is important to try and get out there as long as it's not, going to be really cold and it's not lightning and it's not thundering, that on a little bit of rain will be fun to go out and explore in. So this is my last slide. It's spring, enjoy the change of season and all the experiences it brings. And this little sign said, spring is when you feel like whistling, even when a shoe is full of slush. So that some people might not think that's something to whistle about, but when you're a little guy, sometimes it's just an interesting experience to have.